Hello everybody, I'm Ajit K. Mishra, your course instructor for Literature and Coping Skills. I'm here again with the last lecture of this module. I have already told you all that this is a module on defeating depression, and we have already taken care of feeling weird, losing touch, part 2. And then in my last lecture I talked about break and the coping skills and strategies that it adopts or doesn't adopt. Now we come to the last segment of this module, that is John Keats' Ode on Melancholy. So today I'm going to talk about the idea of melancholy, a subtype of major depressive disorder, and we'll get to see how the speaker in this poetic composition helps us understand different coping skills and strategies that we require in order to overcome the onslaught of melancholy. So let's take a look at these things. So in this lecture, I'm going to focus on the idea of melancholy from the perspective of defeating depression. So before we do so, we need to understand what melancholia is all about, because we're going to talk about melancholy, so it all has to do with melancholia. So it's a subtype of major depressive disorder, that is MDD. Melancholic depression used to be seen as a distinct disorder. There was a time during the ancient times it was seen as a distinctive disorder, but the American Psychiatrist Association has not recognized it as a separate mental illness or a clinical disorder, a separate clinical disorder. It has been categorized under the MDD, that is major depressive disorder. So people with melancholic depression often feel extreme despair and guilt, something that is very akin to MDD. They also struggle to feel any happiness even when good things are happening in their lives. So that is anhedonia, which is also a very important or serious symptom of major depressive disorder. So we can see the similarities between melancholy and MDD. The line of demarcation is very blurred. So, and then melancholia is sometimes called endogenous depression. If you remember, I talked about Kurt Schneider, the German psychiatrist, who was the first to use these terms, endogenous depression and reactive depression, in 1920. So endogenous depression is a kind of depression that comes from within. We do not need any external stimulus or stimuli for this depression to take place in us. So melancholia, as this particular idea suggests, is all about a dispositional issue or dispositional problem. I mean, a problem that is very seriously associated with our personality types or traits. So that way I can take you back to our discussion of personality, wherein I also talked about neuroticism, neurotic personality types. So such disorders also point towards those personality types, because it has to do with disposition. So melancholia began when the Greek philosopher Hippocrates theorized that the human body contained 4 major liquids: blood, black bile, yellow bile, and phlegm, that is fat. So he also theorized that people with these humors, or an imbalance in any of these humors, will lead to some serious dispositional issues. So any imbalance in these fluids would make a human sick, not only physically but also mentally. So that was Hippocrates' proposition. So an excess of black bile is what actually causes despondency, broodingness and fearfulness in somebody. So that means it is the black bile that in fact is the reason behind this type of dispositional issue, that is melancholia. So melancholia in fact was the first term that was used for depression, or that was used to understand the problem of depression, and that was also how the whole discussion or debate over the idea of depression came into existence, through the use of the word or term melancholia. And this term was popularized when Freud, the father of modern psychology, in fact wrote his book on murder, mourning and melancholia. So he was the one who popularized the idea of melancholia in our times. And then melancholia has certain symptoms as well, like situational depression. It also has certain very, very important and visible symptoms. So again, persistent feelings of sadness for a long period of time. When that sadness is prolonged, so that can be a symptom, that can be a sign of melancholia. But then there are occasions when the similarity is so very close that it becomes difficult for someone to tell whether it's an instance of melancholia or MDD. So we can say there's just another type of depression, but there are trained psychotherapists or psychiatrists. They can tell the difference between major depressive disorder and melancholia. Again, loss of interest in activities that were once enjoyable, anhedonia, and then polarized eating and sleeping habits. That means you are not either eating well or sleeping well. You're either eating a lot or not eating at all. You're either sleeping a lot or not sleeping at all. You're experiencing sleeplessness. So these are some of the signs of melancholia. And then a serious symptom is this, that is disrupted cognitive processing. So it will be very difficult for the person who is suffering from melancholia to process information, concentrate. Problem solving skills and decision making skills will also be severely hampered by this particular problem. And then lack of reactivity. As I told you all that in order for a person to experience a reactive depression or situational depression, it's very, very important that the person has that particular potential, has that particular power. But people who experience melancholia lack that particular power. They do not react. So they become so despondent, they become so cut off, withdrawn, that they do not show any interest in things happening around them. So they do not generally react. So, but the problem is, nobody wants to be melancholic. You all will surely agree with me that we do not want sadness. We do not love to be sad. Sadness is generally treated as a negative emotion or negative state, which is detested, which is deplored, which is seriously discouraged. People do not want to be sad. And that's how people do not want to be melancholic either. So it's a big no to melancholia and sadness, because we live in a society that has developed a culture of denial towards sadness. Since it thinks that sadness is a negative, devastating, disturbing, distressing emotion, therefore it needs to be either overcome or it needs to be exterminated. So therefore, we live in a society that's rapidly becoming intolerant of sadness, because we do not love sadness anymore. So sadness is generally labeled through these things, these words, these expressions. Like weak, if somebody is sad, the person will say, oh, you're looking very weak since you're sad. You're looking very silly, looking very stupid, looking depressed. And we all know depressed, the word depression or the word depressed are generally treated as taboo words. So these words can easily ostracize or lead to the ostracization of somebody. So that's one big reason why people generally avoid sadness. Even though they experience sadness, they prevent themselves from talking about that experience of sadness, because we all are happiness obsessed people now. We all want to be happy at any expense, at any cost. We can go to any extent to be happy. We can buy happiness, we can preserve happiness in the cold storage. So we can do anything in order to be happy and in order to sustain our happiness, because of our obsession with happiness, not with sadness. Because we tend to forget that sadness is also an equally important emotion as happiness is, and sadness can actually prepare us for the bigger challenges of life. Sadness can actually make us resilient, strong. It can develop some wonderful coping skills in us, with the help of which we can overcome any amount of stress, anxiety, depression, or any amount of mental challenge, because we are happiness obsessed people. So sadness is generally painted as a problem emotion because it causes problems in people. It pushes somebody into a big problem ditch, so that needs to be kept at bay or eliminated. So this obsession with sadness at the expense of, this obsession with happiness at the expense of sadness, in fact, has robbed us of the capacity for a full life. Because it cannot be that I'll be obsessed with one particular type of emotion and I'll try my best to avoid the other kind of emotion. That avoidance will not help me live a full life. So that's a major problem with sadness or melancholy or melancholia. Now imagine a world without sadness. Can you imagine a world without sadness? Can you do that? Can I do that? Yes, we have been given enough reason by people, by researchers around us, who think and who are very, very sure that it can happen. We can have a world without sadness. We can permanently eliminate sadness, melancholy from our lives, so that we continue to be happy. One such idea is or has been floated by David Pearce, a British transhumanist who is very, very popular for his idea of paradise engineering. Paradise engineering, because he's trying to engineer a world for us which is akin to the paradise in which Adam and Eve lived in complete bliss. There was no strain of sadness anywhere. There was no sign of melancholy anywhere. So David Pearce is talking about a world that is akin to paradise, a world in which there will be no strain of sadness or melancholy. So he thinks that with the help of pharmacology, genetic engineering, nanotechnology, and neurosurgery, this can be done. We can eliminate all forms of unpleasant experiences from human and non-human life, and is very sure about that. So that sounds magical, because there will be no need for us to take care of emotions anymore, because we'll not have emotions that way. There will be just one kind of emotion, that is happiness. There will be no sadness, because we will begin to live in a paradise, in an engineered paradise. So he makes this very strong case for replacing suffering with a gradient of bliss, eternal, permanent bliss, so that there will be no sign of suffering. There will be no instance of sadness or melancholy anywhere. It will be totally free from melancholy, sadness and suffering. But the question is, if that is the case, if that is something which can happen, and in fact even if it happens, what about those emotions that were born with our birth, that came to us naturally? Because like happiness, which is a sought after emotion, sadness is also an equally important emotion. Anger is also an important emotion. Fear is an equally important emotion. So it cannot be that we are obsessed with just one particular type of emotion and we allow ourselves not to live fully, not to live the full human existence. So that's why it's very, very important that we revisit our idea of sadness, suffering-free world, and then concentrate on the idea of the power of melancholy. So when we take a look at the power of melancholy, we get to see that melancholy, in fact, is essential for the emotional mind, because all these emotions, sadness, anger, fearfulness, or joy or happiness, they all are essential features of our existence, our emotional mind, because they all have an important role to play when we emotionally process life's events. They play an equally important role. That's how we differentiate one life event from the other, with the help of these emotions. What kind of feelings do they bring to us? So we can easily distinguish from one life event from the other. And then sadness is our body's way to tell us that something is upsetting us, whether it's an external stimuli or stimulus, or it's something that is happening from within. It can be somebody's thoughts, beliefs, memories that can cause happiness or sadness in you, or maybe somebody's imagination. So these feelings can actually be pointed out, can actually be named through the emotion of sadness. So if somebody has never felt melancholy or sadness, it can be very rightly said that that person has missed out on part of what it means to be human. If somebody is human, then the person has to experience all these emotions. Now the question is between being a human and being a transhuman. So if you prefer to be a transhuman, you are free from all these obligations, these natural obligations. If you continue to be a human or prefer to remain a human, you have to. So that's the biggest difference between being or remaining a human and becoming a transhuman. So sadness, in fact, helped generate the unity we needed to survive. It has a unifying power. Imagine a person who is weeping. That person will definitely draw the attention of people around him or her, and those people will go and ask why that person is weeping. So the same kind of response may not be registered or noticed when the person is happy, is not feeling any sadness or not suffering at all. So sadness has a unifying power or a uniting power. It can unite us, and that is how people in the early days of our civilizational processes came together through the emotion of sadness. And this is probably one big reason why in his The Anatomy of Melancholy, Robert Burton has very rightly said that he that increases wisdom increases sorrow. So sorrow and wisdom are complementary to each other. So if you increase sorrow, if you develop a capacity for sorrows, suffering, pain, sadness, melancholy, then there is every chance that you will be increasing your wisdom. That means you'll become wiser. So your becoming wiser is also largely dependent on your capacity to endure pain, suffering, and sorrows. So that brings us to the idea of the Ode on Melancholy, written by John Keats, an English romantic poet. So when we take a look at this poetic composition, we will be taken aback by the kind of allusions, the kind of analogies that it has drawn, and the allusions it has used. This poem is important because it tells us what to do and what not to do. This poem is important because it tells us that there's nothing wrong about melancholy or sadness. Therefore, an ode has been composed. So an ode generally praises, exalts. So an ode has been composed to praise melancholy. So this is a kind of poem that is written in praise of melancholy, in praise of sadness. So it tells us that melancholy is something which is not to be detested, but to be embraced. If we can do that, if we can wake up to the idea of melancholy, we can in fact begin to live life fully and completely. So with that idea, let's focus on these important things. This poem has 3 such sections, and this is the first section. So when you look at the first section, you'll get to know that the poet is talking about, or the speaker is talking about 3 things, 3 very important things. The speaker is talking about things that one should never do. So we'll come to those 3 things when we pass through or move through these lines. It begins with an admonition. No, do not do that. Do not do this, do not do that. So what is the first instance of this admonition? It says that do not go to Lethe, because that is the mythical river, the Greek mythical river of forgetfulness. So if you are experiencing melancholy, if you are experiencing sadness, the first thing that most of us would like to do is to find a way to overcome it as quick as possible. Therefore, we live in an antidepressant culture or painkiller culture. So you can imagine about it. So every time I experience pain, I promptly find a painkiller that will give me immediate relief. So pain is something that we all are averse to. We all strongly hate, because we live in a painkiller culture. There is painkiller everywhere. It's an avoidant culture. It's an antidepressant culture, because we have antidepressants at every stage for each one of us to take care of our pain, suffering, and melancholy. So in this antidepressant culture, there is every possibility that we'll promptly run to a painkiller whenever we experience sadness or pain. So the idea is not talking about a physical pain. It's about the mental pain, the anguish, the agony that we all experience, melancholy, sadness that we all experience. So If there is an antidepressant or a painkiller for that particular pain, do not do that. The first thing that people do in order to manage their pain and suffering, they try to forget that. Something that disturbs you, you just forget that. Develop forgetfulness. Forget your unpleasant memories. Forget your suffering. That's exactly what we generally get to hear. So, if people forget their suffering, unpleasant memories, that means they are running away from the causes of those painful experiences. So, forgetfulness is no answer to sadness or melancholy. So, there is absolutely no need for somebody to run to Lethe, because you'll forget everything. It is the Greek mythical river of forgetfulness. Don't do that. There are a few other things that people also do in order to forget their painful experiences, their melancholy, sadness. Do not try wolf's bane. That's poisonous. That's poisonous wine. And then do not allow your pale forehead because you are suffering, you are in pains, therefore it's pale forehead. Do not allow your pale forehead to be kissed by nightshade. That's again a poisonous thing, which is otherwise, called the ruby grape of Proserpine. Do not do that. Do not, run to poisonous drinks or poisonous things to relieve yourself of your pain, either temporarily or permanently. Because if somebody takes a large dose of any of these poisonous things, the person will promptly die. If somebody takes a small dose of any of these things, the person will experience an immediate relief in pain. And that's one big reason in why in medieval medicine these were also used as painkillers in small doses or small amounts. Make not your rosary, your offering prayers through your rosary, of yew berries. That's again poisonous. Nor let the beetle nor the death moth be your mournful psyche, nor the downy owl. That means all these are associated with the idea of death. A partner in your sorrow's mysteries. All these things. There is a need for you to avoid. There is a need for you to stay away from all these things. Do not allow them to overwhelm you. So when that happens, this will also happen. You'll become so drowsy that you'll not be able to wake up to your pain and suffering. So when that happens, you will promptly run away from your pain and suffering. You will not face your pain and suffering or your melancholy. You will try to forget your melancholy. You will try to drug yourself to forget the painful experiences of melancholy or sadness, or you will finally choose to surrender to suicide or death. You will become so obsessed with the objects of death, these objects of death, yew berries, beetle, death moth, downy owl, all are the objects of death. You'll become so possessed or so obsessed with these objects of death that you'll think they are your true friends. When that happens, you'll promptly commit suicide and bid farewell to this otherwise wonderful life. So these are the three important things that we need to stay away from. That is how we can overcome our avoidant coping style. It's very popularly called avoidant coping. So there's a negative coping strategy, that is avoidant coping. So you avoid, you run away, you escape, you try to forget, you do not face that problem. At best, you try to commit suicide. So these are the three things that we all need to avoid. The first is forgetfulness. We don't have to forget our painful experiences, because they are going to teach us something important. They're going to make us resilient. They're going to develop a greater amount of endurance in us. So there is absolutely no need to say no to all these things. Just because we live in a culture that denies the importance of sadness or melancholy, there's absolutely no need to say that. We need to rethink the culture that we all live in. So forgetfulness is a big no. Drugs is a big no. We have an important segment on drug use or drug abuse, substance abuse. So drugs is a big no. As I told you, all these are also used as drugs. The nightshade, Bane, if taken in a larger amount, they can turn out to be extremely poisonous. But if taken in a small amount, they can act as painkillers. And then finally, suicide. That is something we all need to avoid. And this can be done only when we think of, moving out of this particular mire or a quagmire. So then we come to the second section of this poetic composition. And then in the second section, the speaker tells us what to do. In the first section, the speaker tells us what not to do. So it tells us that melancholy suddenly falls. It doesn't give you a notice and comes. It suddenly falls. It's so sudden that it feels like a downpour, a weeping cloud, a cloudburst, or fog, dense fog that covers everything, that shrouds everything. So the idea of shroud is used here because it signifies death. So melancholy has the power to promptly push the person into the darker realm, because it's so sudden that the person is not prepared, the person is not ready. Therefore, readiness or preparedness is a skill that we all need to cultivate in all of us, so that the suddenness of any onslaught, including melancholy, will not rattle us. So that's the message. It's so sudden that one needs to understand. So when faced with melancholy, somebody has to do this particular thing. So this is a very, very important idea. Glut, that means you feed. And then again, there is another word, that is feed. Glut and feed. So these two are very, very important expressions here. So they tell us about the coping skills that we need to develop. So we know that very, very well. We know how to cope with melancholy. So we need to glut, we need to go for a perspective shift. When this happens, when melancholy suddenly, falls, we need to shift the perspective. For example, the morning rose, the salt sand wave, the globed peonies, they may have short life, but they have the power to help us switch from one particular condition to the other condition, from a negatively fixed condition to a positive one. So they have that power. And then he also talks about the things that are very, very natural and very, very real in the next few lines, in the last segment. Now he is talking about the beloved who is absolutely obsessed with beauty, but beauty is going to die. So say that's a reality. We all need to accept the fact that beauty is not permanent. It has a short span of life only, so it must die. That's a reality we need to accept. in the same way as we accept our death reality, and we're not scared of it. So even happiness has this particular quality. It always says bye-bye or bids adieu, farewell to all of us. So therefore, we need to understand that these are transitory things, whether it's beauty or joy, these are transitory things. Beyond these things, there will be sadness, there will be melancholy, and we need to take care, we need to wake up to that call. And this aching pleasure, an oxymoron has been used, aching pleasure. The same pleasure has pain contained within it. If you remember Bhartrihari's fear of death, so the same pleasure has some kind of pain contained in it. So that is how within the temple of delight, that is happiness, melancholy lives. So happiness and melancholy are complementary to each other. They make each other complete. We cannot imagine happiness in the absence of melancholy and vice versa. So that's the reason why the speaker finally says that his soul shall taste the sadness of her might. And such a person has a fine palate, a fine taste. Such a person has become wiser. Robert Burton, The Anatomy of Melancholy. A person has accepted more and more sorrows. The person has become wiser. The person has not run away from melancholy, hasn't tried to forget, drug oneself or surrender to death. The person has decided to accept the reality that pain and pleasure are complementary to each other. Since they embrace each other, we also need to embrace each one of them. So sadness has a huge power. That's the might of sadness. That's the power of sadness. Although it seems to overwhelm us, at the same time, it also develops a great amount of resilience in us. And when that happens, we can get our trophies. We can get the rewards in our life. We can say we are living this life fully. We are not running away from life. Imagine how many people run away from life. How many people drop the gauntlet and say goodbye to life and leave like broken soldiers, devastated soldiers. So that's the idea. So the coping skills and strategies that we come across in this particular poetic composition are these. When you take another look at this poetic composition, you will be surprised, you will be amazed by the amount of imagery skills employed in this composition. I told you in one of my previous lectures that imagery skill is it's a very important skill. It's a very important coping skill. Athletes, surgeons all over the world, they practice imagery skills meticulously, and that helps them perform well. So that's why this particular composition tells us the power of imagery skills, both coping and goal imagery, because the goal of the poem is to shift the perspective of a person that is fixed on death to the perspective of life. So that's why this is very, very important, this particular imagery skill, and that can be done more powerfully with the help of images, which the speaker does here. So that teaches us the imagery skill, which is a very powerful coping skill. And then we come to avoidance versus acceptance. So that's also a very, very important coping skill. Avoidance is a short-lived coping skill. If I avoid something, I can protect myself from the onslaught of that particular thing or that particular distressing emotion for a short period of time. But if I accept, that is the beginning of my action. The moment I accept, I will act, and then afterwards I'll be able to overcome it. So if I can overcome it once, I know how to overcome it multiple times or many times. So that is the power which I will derive from that particular exercise. So avoidance and acceptance. In the first section, there is an instance of avoidance when you try to forget, you try to, drug yourself, you try to succumb to death. But in the second instance, when you begin to accept, that guides you out of the avoidance state, and then you find yourself in the acceptance state. The next important skill that we get to see here is that of mental calibration or recalibration. It's a very powerful skill. Mental calibration is absolutely needed because there are occasions when this mind is stuck, this mind is fixed on certain things, and when that happens, you do not find a way out. And that's one big reason why most people do not know what to do once they are stuck in one particular emotion or one particular thing. So calibration or recalibration will help you move out of it. Imagine the smartphone that you own requires calibration periodically. So when you calibrate your smartphone, it understands your touch extremely well or extremely better. So similarly, we also need to go for mental calibration, and this is exactly the skill that we derive from this poetic composition. So there is a mental calibration. In the first section, everyone is stuck. We are stuck in the first section. Once we are stuck, we do not find any way out. We think of closing. We think of closing the doors. Then suddenly there is a mental calibration that helps you suddenly shift your focus to the other things around or beyond those disturbing or distressing things. So that's the skill, the coping skill, the mental calibration coping skill that we derive from this. And then we come to positive thought therapy. And this is a very, very wonderful skill that we all can cultivate, positive thought therapy. So most often when it comes to behavior therapies, people focus on problems and try to change the behavior of the sufferers in relation to the problems. So most often the focus is on problems or the negative thoughts, something that is disturbing you, causing a problem to you. But in this instance, in this composition, the focus is on the positive thought, not on the negative thought. So there is a prompt shift from the negative thought to the positive thought, and that lasts all through. So that works as therapy, positive thought therapy. For example, if somebody has a problem, if somebody cannot write well, then the person can focus on the positives the same person has. Can the person speak well? If the person focuses on the positives will grow larger enough to take care of the negatives. So that is the power of positive thought therapy. And then comparative states. That's a strategy which is employed in this particular poetic composition, with the help of which the speaker offers two states right in front of you. This is state 1, in which you see forgetfulness, you see drug or substance abuse, and then probably death. And there is another state in which you are comfortable, you come to terms with the challenges of life, and you emerge victorious and you win the reward. Now you give me your choice. And I tell you, every time people are given such choices, everyone will go for the second choice, because we all want to live. That's a natural drive. That's an evolutionary drive. We succumb only when we do not have choices. So that's a wonderful technique or strategy that has been employed in this particular poem, comparative states. So these are some of the skills and the strategies that have been employed and that we can derive, that we can learn from this particular poetic composition, and then we can enrich our existence. So that is how we come to the end of this lecture. So thank you very much for joining me.